Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Chief of Staff Show. I'm so excited today to be joined by Sarah Rilling. Sarah, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so we connected over LinkedIn because we're both big fans of the Chief of Staff profession. And I love that you're constantly sort of pushing, pressure testing like the narratives around it and helping to expose some of the misconceptions. You also do this thing that I really love, like sharing all of these open job roles. I'm so glad to have you on the show today because I know you are just like me, like a passionate advocate of the chief of staff profession. And so I'd love to start by just knowing, how did you get into the role in the first place? Can you tell me your sort of chief of staff origin story?
So mine is going to be probably out of the box, as we can tell on my LinkedIn. I'm always talking about how titles are not something that should define us. So I'm trying to work around that. But when I first started, I actually started in sales. So I became a sales manager for a company and I tried hard, but the babysitting part just wasn't for me. And I kept trying and trying and pushing around it. And I finally got to a point where I was like, all right, what can I do to change this to make it better? So I would start looking at the company and saying, hey, as a manager, you can notice a lot of things going wrong. So I noticed, there's issues with customer side, operations side. The CEO wasn't being able to connect with people. So oddly enough, he left and created a new company. And I decided to go with him in the beginning. And that's kind of where it took off. I just started to do things that were more chief of staff and generalist related, as we could say. And it kind of grew from there.
Yeah. So that kind of points back to something that you bring up a lot on LinkedIn also, is that there's no one path to becoming a chief of staff. And I talk about that all the time too. Like, there's not one cookie cutter pathway. There's not, a certain thing that means like you are a perfect chief of staff, but you were the perfect right fit chief of staff for that exec you worked for. Even though you didn't have like the particular title, you came from a sales background. Can you talk to us more about that? Because I think it's really important that people understand there's not like, you don't have to have been an MBA who did consulting for 3 years. You don't have to have one certain trajectory into the role.
Yeah, we all know I preach this. I think there's a big area where it's just, hey, you need to have this title to get this role. Chief of staff, chief of staff, chief of staff. But how did you become a chief of staff in the first place? It's not just like you're a chief of staff. Wow, look at you. That's the title. But it's like you actually have to have a background or some way that you grow in your own skills. So maybe your background was sales. Maybe your background was operations. Maybe you were a teacher. Maybe you were in the military. Every single person has a way to be a chief of staff of their own. So a company, the way that they might need something is completely different than how, all right, this company says, I must have an MBA. I must have a consulting. I must work for Facebook or a big tier company. And it's like, no, you don't. You really don't. You just need to have the skills to be able, like I said, generalist kind of way of looking at the entire corporation saying, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's what we're missing and here's where we can go. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that because they think I'm a risk officer, I'm a third party desk job, or I'm an admin coordinator. I mean, I worked in roles where it was like it's sales. It was like you're an outside sales manager, you're a sales operations manager, you're a lending coordinator manager, you're a manager of this. And it just got to the point where it's like, what? Like, why? This has nothing to do with it. Like, why don't we just generalize the term and make it into it's your chief of staff? You are going to lead this part with me, that kind of area.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. I like to tell people it's not necessarily a specific skill set, it's a mindset. It's someone who, like you, like, I can't just operate in this one area because I'm also thinking about what's happening with the customers, what's happening with product, what's happening with marketing. Like, I can't stay siloed over here. I really want to see like the bigger view. I want to have my hands in everything. And for some people like us, like, we love it and that's where we need to be. Other people, they're cool just sticking in their one lane and growing in that lane, and that's great for them. But there's definitely a different like mindset of, I want to be the generalist. I want to help make sure everything is running correctly and not just my one lane, because we see that like sort of holistic picture of an organization.
You couldn't have said it better. That's exactly the whole thing.
Yeah. And so, speaking of the jobs, I know you post a lot of jobs and chief of staff roles. Share with me your thoughts around like these roles that are really, really narrowly defined of like, you need to have this MBA, you need to do this, you need to have this background. I'd love to just hear more of your perspective around that.
So What I do and how I look at it, like sometimes I'll post remote jobs just to help out other people. It's huge. I mean, I've been in job market, so is everybody else. And it's like I'm looking and I don't know how to search. So I went on Facebook and I started at the search engine, I started to type in chief of staff keywords. And then from the keywords, I would define them down into job postings or job listings. But instead of going to the job posting, I would actually look through the news feed and I would search for the feed and find them that way. But a lot of I'm realized is like a lot of people don't understand what they're looking for. I've worked in roles where we've done the personality trait test and it's like, okay, there are the personalities that, are those people that are just organizers that want to stay in one. Then there's personality traits that could be any of them. But it doesn't mean because your personality shows this that you have to have an MBA. Do I suggest taking a chief of staff course? Yeah. I think it can definitely level up and help you out. When you're looking at different roles, if it says that, maybe it's a red flag for you. Maybe it's a, I shouldn't go for that. And you see it with a lot of bigger corporations because title is key to them. On big banks, and I'm not saying anything bad about big corporations. It's just the higher you go in a level company, the more that your chances of being a chief of staff are judged way higher just because they don't think of it's an HR hierarchy thing. It's not like a, hey, I really need somebody that could do this, this, and this. A small business or a startup is going to look at you and say, bing, you are it. You're the light bulb that I need because you can flex onto anything. I don't care if you don't have an MBA. I don't care if you don't have a consulting. Make your own role is kind of where it goes.
Yeah, that comes up a lot for me too. I'm doing more work in placing chiefs of staff, and a lot of times the exec hiring, especially it's usually startups, nonprofits, they think they need someone with a big title from a big company, and
Yep.
I'm like, that person is not going to want to roll up their sleeves in a five-person startup,
You're right.
like that's not who you need. It's
They're
actually
not
the
gonna dive into everything. The first thing they're gonna look at is pay. Pay,
Mm,
pay, pay, which I understand pay is a big part, but when you're a chief of staff, you need to make sure you have fun and you enjoy what you're doing before you worry about your first paycheck because you're gonna get us up and down in different roles.
yeah, and speaking of that, it's really easy to burn out as a chief of staff, and so you have to. I always tell people like you have to really be passionate about what's happening if you're going to get into this role. It's so immersive. It can't just be about the pay. I do see a lot of people who are, wanting to move from EA or admin roles into a chief of
Yeah,
staff role because it's higher paying, and I'm like, it can't be just that. That is important. I'm a big person of like and I know you and I might not even see completely eye to eye on this because I do think get the title. Like if you're doing the work, get the title because unfortunately that is the system we're operating in and people are still looking at it. But whatever the case, like understanding that pay alone, title alone, that's not going to cut it if you're not really passionate about the work you're doing or excited about the work you're doing. Because how else are you going to influence other teams in the org? How else are you going to put up with like ever changing demands of a CEO?
you're
you
right.
know, unless you're excited about the outcome.
Yeah. I don't think it's just like the title part that it's what it is chief of staff is a title. It's an important title and it's great for people to have. I think it's just the random ones that they like to throw in to take away from, the roles that they could be. I think is the biggest part. And I do agree everything you said. It's identical.
Yeah. Yeah. So where are you sort of seeing, of course, besides that with the JD, what are some of the other like misconceptions you're seeing? Or maybe when you became a chief of staff, if you could speak to, getting that role and that was a boss who pulled you into the role because they knew your skills and your capabilities. Was there anything that surprised you about being a chief of staff? Were there any misconceptions that you ran into and had to like overcome? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I think the biggest part is when I first started my role, no one knew what a chief of staff was because I mean, it has been some time on it. But it was funny because this wasn't a role. It was like an admin officer or COO or operations manager. There wasn't like a chief of staff person. So when I first started in it, after, I had gone through lower and worked for that company, I actually worked for a real estate company and they had a chief of staff prior that did some work and she was no longer there. And they're like, well, we want you to fill the chief of staff role. My role actually was running their membership. They're, building their organization, growing that revenue. And it was all different situations. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just it. So the misconception is like some people don't know what to call you. Like my boss that I did a contracting role, he was like, what do you want your job title to be? I was like, he goes, and he's like, I hear you talk about chief of staff all the time. I see it on your resume. What does that mean? And I was like, great question. I go, You want someone that's going to be an integrator, that's going to come in and take over things, that's going to make sure if you have 12 tasks on there, here's what they're going to be, here's what I need you to do, here's how I need you to take it over. You also have somebody that's going to come in and look at the overall business and say, okay, let me dive in. Let me jump in and let me take over this. And I think the biggest misconception is people just think, whatever your title is on where it has to be, it doesn't match a chief of staff. And that's not where it needs to be. Like, if you're an executive assistant, you can be a chief of staff. You just have to level up and you have to go through I would, like I said again, I'd suggest a course or, you know, put yourself as an integrator role. Jump in, go in, give examples, show where you see something missing, show where you something that's wrong. Like, a lot of people feel like they can't step in and do other departments or step in and say anything. I feel like everybody asks me, well, how do you become a chief of staff? And it's like, just jump in and be one.
Yeah.
Show your CEO, like, I want to do this. I want to be here. Oh my gosh, you need some help in marketing? Okay, let me show you how we could make this better. Where, hey, that's the growth. That's the strategy. That's exactly where, the business expands.
Yeah. And that's really the best advice is to just try it. Just volunteer for something, especially if you're already in an org. We, like you said, the job market is hard. We know the job market is hard right now. So, one really strong pathway for people to become a chief of staff, and it sounds like it's what worked for you, it's what worked for me to get our foot in the door as chiefs of staff was at our existing company through
Yeah,
like sort of a promotion or role change or with an existing boss who's familiar with us. So I also really advocate for that. Like, just start volunteering for the work. Identify where there are gaps, identify where something is missing and it needs someone to like PM it or run it or own it and be that person. Volunteer to be that person. And that's how you start proving your capability, but also feeling more confident that you can do it as opposed to just like jumping in and now you've got the title and you've got the role. Like that can be a little more daunting, right? So if you start by just like you said, just start owning stuff, just start doing things, see, identify where there are problems and go solve those problems. Like I tell people a lot, like, don't, we are problem solvers, but we should also be problem seekers.
I
We should
agree.
be the ones figuring out where are the problems here. So that is like really, really top tier advice. I wonder if there's any other advice you have for people who are new to the profession or considering becoming a chief of staff.
I think my advice is also going to go towards business owners also because I talk to a lot of them, small businesses, startups mostly. I don't really expand too much in big corporations just because the differences I like on the growth part of it. But I had a few of them, they're asking me, they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed. I have a lot of things. How do I start up? How do I grow my small business? Where do I go? I think I need an executive assistant. I don't think that's your first step. I always tell them, and I always tell anybody that's wanting to be a chief of staff, that's where you jump in. You don't have to be an executive assistant to start. Or I said, are you looking for tasks, roles, just basic calendar work? Or are you hoping, you need someone that's going to be a generalist that's going to put here or put things here or jump in here? And they're like, I'm looking for growth. Like, I'm looking someone that'll grow with me and show. There's your chief of staff role. There's where, as a current employee or wanting to be an employee of a company, you show how you could fix something, make it better, integrate any way of that possible. And it kind of changes things in the way that they look at it. So, like I said in my advice, it's either jump in and be an integrator or a business owner, look for that integrator, look for the generalist, look for someone in the beginning that's going to take all the steps out for you. Don't just think, hey, I can get a virtual assistant for $9 just to do this. Like, it's not going to happen or an executive assistant or other operations manager. It's kind of, you need a mixture of everybody in one.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. And I know we're often using the word generalist. I really see that the more that AI is like growing and doing so many things, I think that makes it even more relevant and pertinent that people need generalists because the AI can do like the deep work. Now we need someone who can reach across everything. So what are you seeing there like as a generalist yourself? Like what are your thoughts there?
I think everybody says, and I don't like it at all, it's like, you can only be good at one thing. Like, that's not true. Like, I don't know if this was something back in the old day where it's like you had to be stuck to one thing. Not anymore. AI is showing us you could do every single thing. AI is showing you they can do your job and the job next to you and the job person. Why can't I be that AI? Why can't I be that same exact person? I think AI is going to be a huge tool for chief of staffs because yes, it does give all the answers, as we could say, but it has to formulate from someone's brain. Your brain has to give forth the ideas. It's just a way to enhance your image and enhance the things that you are doing. And I think people are afraid of where that's going to go. And if I swing back to generalists, I think a generalist is a chief of staff. You have to be able to step in and I can help in marketing. I can help in this department. I can help. I can look over the entire department, the entire corporation, say, okay, today I need someone that shows me how to do social media. Have you ever done social media? Sure. I've done it before. Let's do it. Like keep continuing to learn those skills because that's the biggest part that people are missing. You're not getting that. If you say you're not a generalist, you're not trying to do it. I don't think you're trying to learn more. I think that you're just afraid to be in a bigger box. And that bigger box, yes, it's hard to be on a resume in a bigger box because then you look like you're kind of confused. But I think nowadays people need to employers, people that are hiring, recruiters need to look at, okay, what can this person do overall to help the business? Not just, okay, this person was a chief of staff, they have the word operations, they have this. AI is doing that for you. Like that's where recruiters, I think, in HR is going to be replaced if you don't personally dive into somebody and figure out, hey, what's their personality? What's their generalist? What can they do to like improve this business?
Yeah. And I think especially with the chief of staff role, like that is not something that can be easily identified by some like AI bot. Like
Right.
it really is so personality based. That has been my experience with coaching chiefs of staff. This has come up so often where like they're totally capable, they can do the job, but they're having friction with, a conflict averse CEO or a CEO who wants to do a billion things and doesn't know how to like delegate or, the interpersonal part of it really becomes a bigger piece. And that's something that I don't see AI ever solving
Right.
interpersonal dynamics and relationships there. But it's also, like you said, it's something that AI can't pick up on. You can't pick up on certain things just looking at a resume.
You're seeing a lot of people's resumes and you're now doing the job placement thing. What are some things that you've noticed from CEOs or businesses looking for in chief of staffs? I feel like it'd be a huge thing for all of us to hear and like get a good idea of like, okay, they're looking for this, or what are some key things that you've noticed?
That's a really great question because it has been a challenge for me and it's been a little bit unexpected, the different pushback that I hear. And so you are right. There are so many people who want to hire a chief of staff and they're copy and pasting a JD from someone else. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's back up a little bit. Let's scope what you need for a chief of staff. You don't need your buddy's JD for his chief of staff. So there's that piece of it, really understanding. But there is a lot of, as much as I can give pushback to the people I speak to, I'm glad you brought this up because I do want to say there's a lot of people who are looking at LinkedIn's. They are looking at LinkedIn profiles and they're getting 200, 300 applicants for any one role. When they do narrow it down to who they like, maybe 20 or so, who they want to interview, they are looking at people's LinkedIn. They are looking at your profile there. So that's why I do encourage people show up. And like you do an incredible job of that. That's something I do just to build my business. But even if you're not trying to be like a thought leader, you're not trying to, I stayed away from social media for a long time. It felt cringy. But being on this side of it, I see that hiring managers are looking at LinkedIn. So I do convince people like, hey, like, don't worry about what's on someone's LinkedIn. Like, maybe they're busy, like, whatever. But that is where people are looking. And then there's also the issue of people do want to see that you've been a chief of staff before, which is so ridiculous because how do you become a
The
chief of staff?
title.
Exactly. Like, how can you get chief of staff on your resume if everyone thinks you have to have chief of staff on your resume before you can? So that part, explaining that is challenging, but here's a workaround that I always encourage people to do. Either, of course, like getting training. So then you have it on your resume because they are using AI and these, in their ATS systems, they are like, they're looking for chief of staff on your resume, right? Because they have hundreds to pull through. And the truth is there's not any one individual recruiter who's looking through hundreds of applications for one role. So
Those
get chief of
are
staff.
words.
Yeah, get chief of staff on your resume that way, or do the freelance thing. Be a chief of staff, find a nonprofit that you love and be their chief of staff as a volunteer for 1 hour a week or for one project or something. Just get that on your resume so you can at least get past this until we figure out, and convince the world that titles aren't important until we can across. You want to say like get it somewhere on your resume. I like to see like de facto chief of staff for people who were doing the work but didn't have the title. But yeah, so that's what I'm running into a lot is convincing people you actually don't need someone with an MBA because they are going to be used to a lot of structure and a lot of frameworks, and you don't have those yet. So
Yeah.
you need someone who's going to roll up their sleeves, who has worked in a small business before, understands that like everyone's doing everything and understands that things are changing a lot. So that's the sort of messaging that I'm running into.
But, hey, this is great advice. Like, we're all looking for how do you become one in that million, that everybody's applying. Facebook, LinkedIn, social media, all of that. I do believe that they help out a lot, but your LinkedIn is everything. It's your selling profile. And don't be afraid to say things or post things. Like, I know a lot of people are kind of skittish about what they say. I just post what's on my mind. I'm like, hey, this is what I see. And if it can help you, it can help you. If you don't follow me. But it's cool to kinda give advice to things that you've seen and been around and how you build things, and it's great. I
I
will
think
say your course helped me a lot. It definitely taught me things that I was missing that I know that I needed to structure more on and understand more as the chief of staff role, and I think that's a big everybody's afraid of the courses, the costs, the things like that on them. But it's like, I knew how to be a chief of staff just by what companies were, what I've been doing in them, but I didn't know what it meant. Like, what are the steps in it? What were the parts of it? I needed to grow more on the leadership side too, because I was failing on that side because I thought it was babysitting, but it wasn't really babysitting. It was just I wasn't placing myself correctly.
Yeah. And I think that's so important because, like you mentioned too, moving from one chief of staff role to then the chief of staff role in the real estate company, it's a very different role, right? So there are so many gaps to fill. And that is what I attempted to do with the elevation course. Make sure that all of those gaps are like you have at least some level of like understanding of all the different things that you might not have picked up in one chief of staff role or one previous role or another. But yeah, I love what you're doing on LinkedIn, and I think it's also important because that is how, a future employer, a future, like, client, they're going to see that, and they're gonna see that, 1, this person is passionate about the profession, 2, they know what they're talking about. So that gives, me as a hiring person, like, a little extra bit of certainty and, like, assurance. So that's, again, where, like, we all have to get over our fear of being cringe.
Be open at this point. Be open. Everybody else is.
Yeah, yeah. So before we go, is there anything you'd like to share? Just any what you're working on? Any parting words of wisdom?
I also think another big thing that I've always been, said to and people bring up a lot are, okay, well, if you're the chief of staff, why aren't you just the CEO if you're doing everything? Which is kind of funny because I currently, I have worked for a contract role where I have actually got a great opportunity. The company that I work for has three different companies. So the opportunity to jump into any of them was open. He came to me and he was like, hey, guess what? It's holiday lighting season. You're going to take over Blingle. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, I'm going to just hand you the company. He was like, marketing, finance, employees, hiring, HR. You're going to run it just like a CEO. And to be honest, that was the best experience someone could give me because it showed me exactly how I needed to think, how I needed to look at things, how I needed to expand, and how I could do things on my own without it. So, yes, I mean, you could be a CEO, you could be a COO after this, but some people like the chief of staff and they don't want to go to that, next step. So be open to what your future can give you as a chief of staff and don't think that has to be your only title. And don't think that just because you are a chief of staff, you can't be an operations manager, you can't do executive assistant work, you can't do a lot of things. And I think people are kind of misconception on are you a CEO? Are you a CEO? There we go with the titles again. Just
Mhm.
put them in there. So my advice is take that jump. Go for it. Don't be afraid.
I love that. That is perfect advice for everything in life and especially for becoming a chief of staff. So thank you so much, Sarah. And
Thank
I'm
you.
going to drop in the comments where people can find you on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.